Welcome to Energy Stew. This is Peter Roth, your host. And I'd like to ask you, how far out are you? Are you psychedelic? We're going to introduce our guest in a moment, but maybe you've had some psychedelic experiences like I have, and our guest has had, and are interested in this world of psychedelics and even psychedelic medicine. So there's this wonderful book called Psychedelic Medicine, The Healing Powers of LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, and ayahuasca. And so our guest is the wonderful author of this book, Dr. Richard Lewis Miller. Richard, welcome to Energy Stew.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.
I'm so excited to talk to you because this has been a lifelong journey of mine, and I know of yours, as you talk about in the book. And it started by having a psychedelic experience that showed you what our universe is really like and who we are in it in ways that we never could see before, and most people have no idea. So what a journey you've been on.
It's been quite a journey, Peter. And as you said, once you experience one of these psychedelic medicines and really experience it, there's no going back, because you can't, because once you see that we're not living in only this universe, that there are many universes going on simultaneously.
Well, that's the universe, is multi-universe.
Once one sees that, you can't not see it anymore. And once your consciousness is stretched, you can't really shrink it. So it's there. So
and it's been a tough journey because of the powers that be in the world. Because you and I started at a time when it was all innocent, really. There was much more exploration. I had my first experiences in the early mid '60s, and as you say, there's no going back. Yet going forward is a lot of trepidation because of the powers that be.
Well, yes. I mean, you and I were fortunate that we were able to do exploration into these medicines when they were legal in the early 60s. And so one of the things that happened, of course, is 1967, LSD became illegal. 1985, MDMA became illegal. And what it basically did then was turn who knows how many hundreds of thousands, actually with LSD, tens of millions, and with MDMA, tens of millions, we know that. It turned tens of millions of people into illegal operatives or criminals, if you will.
So it was illegal to explore consciousness.
It became illegal to explore consciousness. If people thought the earth was round and wanted to explore it, they didn't believe it was flat, they could go to jail for it.
Right. And so one of the issues is that, and I think it's very important, I think the whole world that we live in is distorted by the power of control over us and needing to limit our minds.
Well, yes. I mean, there's a strong disagreement here with regard to our constitutional rights. There are some of us who very strongly believe that it's our constitutional right to be able to explore the inner workings of our mind and the inner workings of our consciousness, so long as we do so in the privacy of our homes without impacting or affecting another human being. This is my mind and my body to explore. And I mean that in the fullest sense of the word. And whereas exploring the inner realms of my mind using psychedelic medicine is a very safe thing to do, I mean, I think those people, I'm not one of them, but I think those people who decide they want to cut open their stomach and pull their intestines out, I've read cases of that, and then put it in a hose on the end in order to clean out to clean out their innards and then connect it back up, I think they're entitled to do so. It's our minds and our body. I used a dramatic example, but on purpose. I mean, that is almost a ridiculous thing to do from some of our judgmentalness selves.
Well,
I'm saying we're entitled, but we're certainly entitled to explore our consciousness.
But I don't think that can be understood unless you know how the universe really works on higher dimensionality. Because if you don't, then you're seeing it through the filter of limitations that get very upset about anything out of order.
Well, yes, there's a tremendous amount of resistance to exploration and change, and it's political, it's ideological, and it's theological, and we've had that throughout all of history. That's why I use the example of the Earth being round and flat. It's the same with whether we rotate around the sun or whether the sun rotates around us. The belief systems are hard fought to keep entrenched.
I keep telling people that our souls actually come here knowing that we're coming to a stupid planet.
Well, that's a little harsh, Peter. How about we're coming to a planet in early development?
Well, that's right. It's still stupid.
Uneducated, perhaps.
Right. And so those of us who have had these enlightening experiences can't really process how unenlightened other people still need to be in their own lives, and how much fear they're in to want to control us and buy into all the propaganda of the control mechanisms that create fear, even more fear, telling us how bad things could be if they don't keep a lock on our brains.
Oh, I think those of us who have experienced these medicines, I think we do know what they're dealing with, because they become even more obvious to us when we've experienced these medicines. We know exactly what's going on with them, because not only can we hear their lyrics, which are the words that they use, but we're also able to read the sounds of their voices, their tones, their facial expressions, their body language,
right,
all the other ways in which they're communicating, including the clothing that they wear, the cars they drive, the homes they live in, the food they eat, all those things, whether they smoke cigarettes or not, whether they drink alcohol or not, all these things are expressions of who they are, and many of them are expressions of the great fear that they live in every single day. And that's a very sad and unfortunate aspect of the earliness of our development, if you will.
Right, and I've done radio shows about soul development and how many souls here are really young souls and are vulnerable to false belief and to fear, and not be able to see the things that, for instance, you and I are talking about. And probably a lot of our audience are very familiar with what we're speaking about.
I would imagine so, particularly since you're broadcasting from New York City, where there are a lot of evolved people, I would imagine,
and many unevolved people. And so it's really about awakening, and that's really what so much about what your book is about, is the opportunity for awakening if we only had access to the right medicines.
Yes, it's a sad commentary that the American public, as well as the people in the rest of the planet, have been denied access to medicine for about 50 years now, a half a century of denial.
And that's because you're calling it medicine, and many of them call it drugs.
Well, sometimes in this world, the same substance can be used in different ways. Cocaine, for example, can be used to get high as a drug. It can also be used as anesthesia in ophthalmological surgery. It used to be. So LSD is the same. So is MDMA, psilocybin. The medicines in my book, I would say at least 3 of them can be used either as a drug or as a medicine. The main difference is the method of administration. When
the purpose of it.
Well, part of administration when it's used as a medicine is that it has a purpose, because the protocol for using these substances as medicines calls for intention, it calls for preparation, it calls for very clear choosing of the mindset of the person, that's part of the intention, and the setting where they take it, and also having a guide. These are some of the critical aspects of using the substance as a medicine. Whereas when you use it as a drug, you can simply wake up on a Saturday morning, pop one of these things into your mouth, and do whatever you feel like doing, which might even include going out into the world. When one uses these substances as a medicine, one does not go out into the world. One stays put for the entire experience, because the experience is inside of us. The experience is not outside, although you may look outside if you happen to take it in a setting, to take it as a medicine in a setting which is a beautiful, quiet piece of nature on a beach. Of course, you look out and you might be seeing the waves as different forms of animals, or the clouds as ballet dancers. But it's still primarily a personal experience. It's not, particularly with LSD, more than an interactional one, although it can be interactional. And I hesitated there because MDMA, of course, is a wonderful medicine for interactional work with couples because of the heart opening and the opening of the consciousness, which lowers our defenses and increases our capacity for empathy.
But one thing that's a problem is that MDMA also can be known as ecstasy, and and in the marketplace, people who are purchasing it might not be purchasing true MDMA. They might be purchasing false drugs.
Oh, it's much stronger than that. You said it quite diplomatically there, Peter. Our research indicates that what's being sold on the street around the United States as ecstasy is rarely MDMA. It's full of adulterants, and the public has to be very, very warned about this. I tell people all the time that if they're buying something on the street that they think is ecstasy, before they take it, they should be mailing it in to a lab and having it tested. You don't want to just take something off the street and put it into your body. That's a dangerous thing to do. When I say MDMA, I'm talking about professionally manufactured or created in the laboratory a substance which is a medicine. I'm not referring, when I say MDMA, I'm not at all referring to a street drug called ecstasy. This is very important, and I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, it meant a lot because I have now adult children, but they used to be kids out on the street, and it was always a concern to me about street drugs.
Oh, of course. Now, fortunately, what I said about MDMA and ecstasy being so different is not the case with LSD. LSD is very rarely in picking up and buying these things around the country for research purposes to see what's in them. Very rarely is LSD anything but LSD.
Good to know.
Yeah, but it very rarely. In fact, I don't know of any cases of it whatsoever. Whereas with, as I said, with ecstasy, you don't know what you're getting. The buyer has to be extremely careful. Now, fortunately, with the mushrooms, with psilocybin mushrooms, mushrooms are mushrooms. And if you get psilocybin mushrooms, they're not going to be, the plant wasn't raised with anything else in it. So you're going to get 100% psilocybin mushrooms. That's why many people who are doing personal experimental work with these medicines prefer the mushrooms, because they're easy to get access to, since they're easy to grow in just about anybody's kitchen window.
Wow, that's wonderful. And your book also talks about ayahuasca.
Yes. Now, ayahuasca, of course, when you take ayahuasca, for the most, you're getting ayahuasca. I mean, it's a very powerful mix of two plants that come from South America. I have not heard reports from around the country of people being given ayahuasca that's not ayahuasca. And that you know as soon as you take it, because the effect, like LSD, is profound.
Right. And so that's why it's very important to approach this very correctly with guides, with people who are very experienced. And because a lot of people aren't prepared for such an altered state of consciousness.
Oh, yes. I mean, to take particularly to take LSD or psilocybin or ayahuasca without the proper preparation and without a guide that really is an experienced guide, it's a risky thing to do. It's not quite like flying a plane without having any training in flying a plane, but it's close. I mean, the major difference is, if you do that with a plane, you could get physically killed. You do that with one of these substances, you could get psychologically abraded, because the main difference, Peter, between having a guide and not having a guide is that when you have a guide and you get into what's called a bad trip, namely you're dealing with your demons, you're dealing with what Jung called animas, the shadow side. When you have a guide, that's the meat of the trip. That's the good stuff, because you want to get into the stuff that scares you the most, so you conquer it and completely let go of it. And therefore, the more of the fears that one carries within, that one faces and heals, and thereby eradicates, the less fear we then walk around with in the world. So
a lot of people are too afraid to face their fears.
Well, but that's right. But when you have a guide that you trust, you face them together, and the guide teaches you how to face them head on, or from the side, from the flank, if you will, and to deal with them properly, so you come away with a feeling of mastery and confidence. And as you do that, then the fear of facing the fears decreases. The more successes you have dealing with internal fears, be they small or large, the more successes you have, the more confidence you have, until you join the ranks of those of us who just love going on search and destroy missions, looking for every drop of fear in every little tiny crevice of our consciousness, so that we can walk tall in the world without them.
But that is such a profound idea that so many people can't comprehend, because you really have to understand the larger picture to be in that dark night of the soul, so that you can have the perspective to manage it, more intelligently.
Yes, but once again, that's why I say when you go to Africa, you go with a guide. I think maybe that's better than the airplane analogy. When you go to Africa, you go with a guide. It's still scary, but the guys, he or she is there to save your life if necessary.
Right.
And the same is true here. This,
Right.
this guide will save your psychological life and turn something possibly unpleasant into something extremely exciting.
Well, isn't ayahuasca more of a medicine that explores those dark sides than the others?
I can't speak really well of ayahuasca. I can speak really well of LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin, and I can speak extremely well of those three in terms of consciousness expansion, interpersonal connectivity, healing, and creativity. Ayahuasca, I don't relate to in the same way. It's a big psychedelic experience, but I have not had positive experiences with it in terms of bringing back across into this consciousness material that I could use. The experiences have been more experiences unto themselves rather than
Personal.
personal experiences unto themselves,
Right.
but not educational, not expansion, so that when I'm back, I can say, okay, this is what I've learned. The day after a psychedelic experience as a medicine is the day of integration, when you sit with the guide and you go over the material and over material that was important and work together on it. I have not had that with ayahuasca, where I felt like the amount of time that I put into the experience was enough of a benefit in terms of what I got back afterwards. That's a personal experience, Peter. I'm not speaking
It's
medicine as a whole, but that's my experience with it.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
I'm also I'm suspicious of the amount of regurgitation that goes on with ayahuasca.
Right.
Because as Peter Beyer wrote, Talking to the Plants, told me when I interviewed him, yes, it is an emetic, and the natives originally were drawn to it as an emetic because since so much of their food was contaminated without having refrigeration, they needed something that would make them throw up very quickly, and they searched for it.
Wow.
And when they found this particular one, it was effective, but it brought with it these psychedelic, what you might call side effects, which then became the primary effects.
Wow, that's fascinating. So moving back into even LSD and these other psychedelics, it's a lot of it can't even be talked about. A lot of it is just a knowing, an experiencing that's beyond words.
Well, I think that's for writers much greater than myself, such as Michael Pollan, who is a writer, and he spent time on his recent book that we all know, and searched for and found words to describe the experiences. But as you're pointing out, that's a Herculean task to find words to describe very large consciousness changes and experiences.
Right. It's amazing to have these, and I'm glad that I did when I was so young, and it had definitely altered my whole life. and I'm, I'm psyched. I haven't really had the opportunity to explore these in decades, and I'm actually looking forward to doing more of that. Although, I'm in New York and I have no idea how to go about it. Maybe we should talk. But I loved having those interdimensional, multidimensional experiences.
Yes. Well, you're paying a price for political suppression of science.
Right.
That's really what's going on, that we've had an over 50-year suppression of science at the highest university levels.
Right. And actually, maybe at some point soon we can do a show about science in the world. And because I know that you're also very politically oriented and understand the nature of the tribulations that we're going through.
Yes.
And yeah, it's amazing where we are right now. And I think all for a good reason, because I think, you know, something is broken now that has to be fixed, but fixed the right way.
Well, there's a crack in the wall of suppression because of marijuana leading the way.
But I think it's a crack that's going to explode, you know, that open up in more dramatic ways than we think. And I'm hopeful for that. But we should be grateful for the crack at least.
Well, Dr. Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies that most of your listeners probably are quite aware of, Rick Doblin says that he believes that MDMA will be a prescription medicine by the year 2020 or 21. So there's a sign of progress.
Well, could be sooner, depending on if things explode more, because, you know, it's not linear. Life isn't linear. So
right,
we'll see.
It's not linear.
But I think I'm so grateful to be in the time that we're in, and that you've written this book, Psychedelic Medicine.
Oh, there it is.
People should really appreciate learning about so much of what's in the book. You have so many scientists contributing to this book, and it's really brilliant. So I want to thank you for doing that. And we're really about to run out of time.
Okay.
Is there a website that people can go to?
Yes, you can go to the website of my my radio program, mindbodyhealthpolitics.org, mindbodyhealthpolitics.org. And there I have a lot of the interviews of the people who are in the book Psychedelic Medicine, as well as other interviews. I think I did the longest running series on psychedelic medicine, perhaps, that's ever been broadcast in the country. So there's a lot of good interviews.
But that makes sense too, because of the politics.
Yes.
And so I do want to speak with you more. Hopefully you'll agree to do another show with me fairly soon.
Be glad to, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
So glad I could. Dr. Richard Lewis Miller, thank you so much. And this is Peter Roth, your host of Energy Stew at prn.fm. I can be reached at peter@heartriver, HEART river.org, or 212-222-7748. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks so much for listening.